Federal agents have shattered a massive international student visa network in Texas, exposing a shocking $900 million fraud.
The parking lot behind the administrative annex on West Grauweiler Road was empty at 4 in the morning, the way it was supposed to be. A single sodium lamp buzzed over row 7. The security gate had logged its last entry at 11:42 the night before. A maintenance vehicle, cleared and gone. Inside the building, on the 3rd floor, a printer was still warm. It had not been scheduled to run. Her name was Marisol, and she had been working nights in the records office of a mid-sized private university outside Irving, Texas, for 6 weeks. She was 24, a first-generation college graduate, and her job was almost embarrassingly quiet. She matched incoming international student files against the federal SEVIS database and flagged mismatches for morning review. On the Tuesday after Labor Day, she noticed something small. A student named in 3 separate transfer files had 3 different birth dates. Not one typo, 3 distinct dates, on 3 distinct forms, each signed by 3 distinct registrars, none of whom were currently employed by the school. She wrote a sticky note. She stuck it to her monitor. She went home. Marisol did not know it yet, but she had just become the first person outside the system to see it. The case would eventually be logged as FBI 4417 vs. a joint operation between the Bureau's Dallas field office and Homeland Security investigations under ICE, with cooperating referrals from the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs and the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General. Jurisdiction ran through the Northern District of Texas. The named target, at least in the early paperwork, was an international student services organization operating under a nonprofit charter out of a 2-story office building in Plano, with satellite arrangements at 4 accredited institutions across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. On paper, it was a routine records audit. On paper. The first 3 anomalies were logged within 11 days of Marisol's sticky note being escalated. The first was a sponsorship affidavit signed by a Dr. PM, a physician of record listed as the financial guarantor for 87 students over a 4-year period. Dr. PM had died in a car accident on Interstate 35 in September of 2019. His signature had continued to appear on notarized documents for another 3 years and 4 months. The second was a shell entity called Meridian Academic Solutions LLC, which the affidavits listed as a supplemental tuition sponsor. Its registered address was a rented mailbox at a strip mall pack and ship in Richardson, and its only listed asset was $217.44 in a business checking account that had received 41 wire transfers in 18 months, totaling $6.3 million. The third was an invoice, discovered in a routine subpoena of the organization's vendor payments, billing $184,000 to the university's International Programs Office for credential verification services, dated November 8th, for services rendered between November 12th and November 19th of the same year. 3 small things, each one, on its own, could be explained. Together, they could not. If you're still here, stay with me. This next part is where investigators stopped sleeping, and if you want more stories the headlines walked past, tap subscribe. Quietly, the way this whole case started. The slow walk inward began on the 2nd week of October, when agents from the FBI's Dallas field office executed a records preservation order on the servers of the International Student Organization. They did not raid, they asked. They came in during business hours with a court order and 2 IT specialists, and they cloned the servers while the reception desk offered them coffee. What they took back to the field office was 2.4 terabytes of internal correspondence, scanned immigration paperwork, tuition ledgers, and something the technical team had not expected. A mirrored folder structure, identical in every respect, labeled Archive B, which contained a parallel set of student files. The names in Archive B did not appear in the university's official enrollment database. The financial transactions attached to those names totaled $312 million. By the 3rd week of October, forensic accountants had mapped the pattern. Students in the primary folder were real: visas, addresses, transcripts, graduation records. Students in Archive B existed only as documents. Their I-20 forms had been generated on the organization's own equipment. Their SEVIS entries had been created and then quietly deactivated on a rolling 90-day cycle, long enough to trigger tuition disbursements, sponsorship payments, and third-party scholarship transfers, short enough to avoid federal reconciliation audits. The Thursday before Halloween, an agent named in the file only as Special Agent KR flagged a subfolder inside Archive B called simply Returns. It contained 6,814 wire confirmations. The total, calculated to the cent, was $847, $221,163.42. By the first week of November, that number would grow. A separate tranche of transactions, routed through 4 nearly identical LLCs registered in Nevada, Delaware, and New Mexico, added another $53 million. The working figure investigators used from that point forward was $900 million, and it was described in internal memoranda as conservative. The physical artifact that came to define the case, at least for the agents working it, was not the servers or the wire logs. It was a single post-it note, yellow, curled at one corner, found stuck to the underside of a desk drawer during the eventual search of the Plano office. It read, in blue ballpoint, "Do not process F1s from batch 14 until D clears. No last name, no date, no context. It would be photographed, cataloged, and referenced in the eventual indictment as Exhibit 47. The raid, when it came on a Thursday in mid-November at 5:15 in the morning. Agents from the FBI, HSI, and IRS Criminal Investigation entered the Plano office and 3 residential addresses across Collin and Dallas counties. By the time the warrant was served, agents already knew what they would find. The interesting part was what they didn't expect to find next to it. In a locked closet on the second floor of the Plano building, inside a fireproof safe whose combination was written on a laminated card taped to the back of a printer, agents recovered 11 encrypted external hard drives, a stack of 43 unused U.S. passport blanks that had been reported stolen from a State Department contractor in 2018, and a spiral notebook containing handwritten reconciliations of payments to individuals identified only by initials. One set of initials appeared on 41 separate pages, always in the receiving column, always the same amount, always $12,500. The named target of the investigation was a man in his late 40s who had founded the International Student Organization in 2011, held a doctorate in international education policy from a well-regarded state university, and had been photographed the previous year at a state education roundtable, seated 2 chairs from the lieutenant governor. He was arrested, arraigned, and released on a $2 million bond within 36 hours. His attorneys issued a statement describing the charges as a misunderstanding of complex international enrollment procedures. Investigators, reading the file, did not believe he had designed any of it. The second figure entered the record almost by accident. Her name surfaced in the 3rd round of interviews, mentioned in passing by a former junior accountant at the organization who had left the previous spring and now lived in Missouri. She had worked there for 9 years. Her title, on paper, was Assistant Director of Compliance Documentation. Her actual role, according to the accountant, was to review every outgoing federal filing before it was submitted and to flag any language that could trigger a secondary audit. She was 56 years old. She had been a licensed CPA for 31 years. She had filed her own taxes correctly for 31 years. In seized signal messages, colleagues at the organization referred to her only as the second signature. Her private writing was recovered from an encrypted partition on a laptop found in her home in Frisco. Most of it was mundane: grocery lists, medical appointments, a running budget for a home renovation. One entry, dated the previous February, read, "The numbers don't have to lie. They only have to be tired enough that no one reads them twice. That is the whole job. Everything else is theater." She had underlined the word theater. She did not appear in any of the organization's public materials. There was no photograph of her on the website. She had never given an interview. She had, according to the accountant, personally reviewed every I-20 form in Archive B. Take a breath here. I had to, the first time I read the file, because the next page is where this stops being a fraud case and starts being something the public was never supposed to see. The public-facing resolution arrived in stages, cleanly, the way institutional resolutions do. In late spring, a federal grand jury in the Northern District of Texas returned a 14-count indictment against the founder and 6 associates, including the Assistant Director of Compliance Documentation. The charges included visa fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, wire fraud, money laundering, and aggravated identity theft. The Department of Justice press release described the operation as one of the largest immigration fraud schemes ever charged in the region. A joint press conference featured the U.S. Attorney, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Dallas field office, and a senior HSI official. The dollar figure released to the media was $900 million. 12 properties were seized. Bank accounts across 3 states were frozen. 4 accredited institutions announced internal reviews of their international programs. The founder was placed on home confinement pending trial. The assistant director pleaded not guilty and requested a separate proceeding. The case, publicly, was closed enough to be reported and quiet enough to be forgotten. That was the version released to the press. The version inside the file was 42 pages longer. Those 42 pages, referenced in the sealed supplement to the indictment and reviewed under protective order, contained something the public statements did not. The architecture of the fraud, the parallel folder system, the 90-day CVIS deactivation cycle, the sponsorship affidavits routed through shell LLCs, the reconciliation ledgers kept in initials only, was not unique to Texas. Investigators had identified functionally identical systems operating in California, Michigan, and Georgia. The Georgia network had been running since 2014. The California one had been running since 2012. Both had been closed quietly in the previous 18 months, without indictments, without press releases, without public record, after the operators reached non-prosecution agreements in exchange for cooperation. The Texas case, according to internal FBI correspondence, was the first one prosecuted publicly because the Texas operation had grown large enough to attract congressional attention. The others had been allowed to close on their own terms. More than that, a senior compliance officer within the SEP unit of IC's Student and Exchange Visitor Program, a position with sign-off authority over school certification and recertification reviews, had, according to internal audit logs, closed 17 preliminary compliance inquiries into the Texas organization between 2016 and 2021 without triggering secondary review. 9 internal warnings from field officers had been filed and marked resolved without further action. The compliance officer, whose name appears in the sealed supplement with the title Deputy Chief of School Certification, had retired the previous November, 3 weeks before the raid. Her pension paperwork had been filed correctly. Her exit interview had been unremarkable. This was not a failure of the system. The system performed exactly as it had been quietly reconfigured to perform. There was a woman named Grace who lived in a small apartment in Arlington. She had come to Texas on a student visa in 2017 to study nursing. She had paid the organization $18,000 in fees over 3 years for what she believed was legitimate academic sponsorship. When her real visa lapsed because of paperwork the organization had never actually filed, she was detained for 6 weeks. She lost her apartment. She lost her clinical placement. She lost her mother, in Lagos, who died while Grace was in a facility outside Alvarado and could not travel. Grace was released without charge. She was not named in the indictment. She is not on any list of victims that has been made public. She still has the receipts. What the file still does not say, even in its sealed form, is who authored the original template. The parallel folder system, the 90-day cycle, the initials-only reconciliation ledger, all of it predates the Texas organization's founding by at least 2 years. Investigators have not identified the origin. They have identified only that the same structural fingerprints appear in a closed 2010 case out of the Eastern District of Virginia involving a language institute that surrendered its SEP certification without prosecution. The lead investigator on that 2010 case retired in 2013 and now consults for a private immigration services firm whose client list is not public. The file does not accuse him. It does not need to. It simply notes, on page 39 of the sealed supplement, that the architecture of the Texas fraud is not the beginning of anything. It is a middle chapter. There are earlier ones. There are later ones. Investigators have not yet been given the resources or the clearance to look for them. If this story stayed with you, comment filed below. It tells me you want the ones the headlines skipped. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next file opens. There's no shouting on this channel, just the parts that were left out. The next case begins in a hospital records room in southern Arizona, where a night shift medical coder noticed that a patient discharged in 2019 had continued to receive treatments for another 18 months. The next file is already open,